Maybe, where is Ambroise? Oui, on va le mettre là. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jean BENSAID, and I'm very pleased to moderate this panel dedicated to energy transition, defining the new playground. As you notice, this panel is as gender balanced than the previous one. For this session, we have the pleasure to welcome four distinguished participants. Mr. Darko ADAMOVIC, partner at Gibson Dunn. Mr. Andrew BLEASE, managing director within the infrastructure finance group of Moody's. Mr. Louis-Roch BURGARD, co-head of equity investment at Infranity fund. And Mr. Ambroise FAYOLLE, Vice President of the EIB. Just to begin, a few remarks. The case for transforming the global energy system in line with the 1.5 degrees goal has never been stronger. August 2023 was the hottest on record by a large margin, and the hottest month ever after July 2023. The impacts of climate change are increasingly frequent and severe, and scientific warnings about the dangers of the current pathway have become stronger than ever. We know that the energy sector is a source of around 75% of greenhouse gas emissions today, and holds the key to averting the worst effects of climate change. At the same time, the number of countries that have pledged to achieve net zero emissions has grown rapidly over the last year and now covers around 70% of global GDP and CO2 emissions. In Europe, in 2020, the EU decided to target carbon neutrality in 2050 with an immediate objective of a 55% reduction in emissions by 2030. So countries are committed to net zero more and more, and we know that reaching this objective means a complete transformation of how we power our daily lives and the global economy. It means accelerating the shift to clean sources of energy, and at the same time dramatically reducing the use of fossil fuels. It means also increasing energy efficiency, electrifying transport, industry and buildings, expanding the use of clean hydrogen and other low-emission fuels. So it's a very complete transformation of our economies that we are facing. And this energy transition requires an immense investment effort, which is already engaged. We talk about some 2 to 3% of GDP of additional investment in Europe per year between now and 2030. And also the widespread consensus is that the climate crisis cannot be solved by public capital only. A successful and sustainable transition requires the mobilization of private capital. So during this panel, we'll try to highlight the main challenges that we are facing to implement the energy transition. Challenges in the short run, with the changing macroeconomic environment and its consequences, and also the long-term challenges, meaning what will happen after 2030 for the second stage of the energy transition. And I would like to start this discussion with some questions to Ambroise about the EU situation and prospects. Ambroise, I'd like to ask you what is the state of the Union regarding energy transition in the EU. More precisely, how do you assess the current trend of the energy transition in the field of electrification of industry, buildings, transport, grids, and low-emission fuels? Are we on track? Are we ahead or behind the objectives set up in the Fit for 55 plan?
Thank you, Jean, and good morning to all of you. I would say a few things about where we stand, and especially where we at the Climate Bank of the European Union stand in implementing our strategy that is completely in line with Fit for 55, and what has changed since Fit for 55 was decided. What is the current situation is that Fit for 55, there is the regulatory framework that is almost in place. I mean, there are a few remaining parts that need to be adopted. There are some national plans that needs to be implemented and defined by 24, but more or less the key objective is there, and it implies in particular an increase in renewable energy investments to 45% of total energy consumption by 2030. So this is something where the ambitions are there. The means are also clearly there. When you look at, we at EIB, we have put in place a climate bank roadmap. We have 3 objectives. We want to do at least 50% of climate projects by 25. We want to attract investors, especially private investors, to mobilize on our investment 1 trillion of additional investments by 2030. And all our projects have to be Paris-aligned since 2021. And actually since 2022, we also ask our counterparts to be Paris-aligned. So this is the framework that is in place. What we see is a strong interest in the market. Energy for us has been more than 20 billion euros financing last year. 20 billion means basically between a quarter and a third of our total investments. So it's really massive. Total climate investment on our portfolio last year was 58%. So we have already reached and we're above the target for 2025. We are online on reaching the 1 trillion investment mobilized, and all our projects are Paris-aligned. So things are really put in place, being for renewable energy, be it for energy efficiency, be it for innovation. And in particular, actually, we are very active these days in promoting and developing projects in the battery sector. Batteries, which is very important not only for cars, but also for storage and trying to deal with the issue of the difficulty to store energy of wind and solar. So that's basically it, and I think we can say that the movement is really good. What has changed is 2 things. One you have mentioned, it's the economic and the financial context, meaning in some sectors more difficult to finance it, meaning for a public bank more projects that we can finance because we need to be there when there is risk to be taken. You know, as a public bank, we are not going to finance projects that can be financed by the private sector. We want to be there to make it possible for private sector investors to join us. And of course, in a more uncertain environment, it is something that is very, very relevant for us to increase our investments. We also are, because we are a AAA bank, every time there is an increase in interest rates and spreads are over, of course, it makes us more attractive relatively. So that's something where we have a lot of potential investment. What has changed also is the geopolitical context. And actually, it has triggered increased requests for more investments. And let me just mention two. One, which are related actually. One is the debate about Repower EU. Repower EU is an initiative that has been launched by the European Union after the Russian invasion of Ukraine to increase the investments in the renewable energy sector in particular. For us, it means that by 2027, in addition to what we have already anticipated to finance, we will finance 45 billion euros more of investments in the renewable energy sector. So that is massive, actually, and that is needed if we want to be, and that's the second element of this, if we want to have really some autonomy and sovereignty in our decisions on our future sources of energy. And there have been a lot of initiatives that have been taken. I'm not going to list all of them, but it's clear that when implemented, all of them are going really to help put in place the plan that leads to 2050 and neutrality objective for the European Union. But it pertains to net zero industry act, it pertains to all the work that is done in trying to alleviate the problems of the permitting sector, problems that are in the daily life of those who are dealing with these issues, basically. The Critical Raw Material Act is part of that. So there is, I would say, things are moving ahead, I would say, quite good. We need to do more, and we need to implement what has been already decided, and we need all possible investors for that, because the international context has become really more difficult.
Thank you, Ambroise, for this overview of the situation in EU. So you said that we are globally on track with the objectives, but we need to do more, especially due to the macroeconomic context and the geopolitical context. So it's a very interesting point of view. I don't know if anyone would like to follow up on this first statement by Ambroise before we go to the second set of questions. I don't know. No? Okay. So I would like now to turn to the market players' point of view, especially regarding what is going on in the EU on one side and in the US on the other side, with the IRA in the US versus the Green Deal in Europe. And I would like to ask you, how do you compare the strategies between the US and the EU from your point of view, which is a market player's point of view? Do you consider, for example, the US IRA and also stronger industrial policies in other countries such as China, Korea, or Japan? Is it changing the strategic landscape for clean energy investment to the detriment of Europe? And if so, what can be done about it? And how do you compare the situations?
The first one is the difference between the US and the EU situation from the onset. And I think it's fair to say that for the US, there still is access to cheap energy, and that IRA, basically being fiscal subsidies, will not really materially change this situation. And the situation that we've had in Europe is completely different, as everyone knows, with higher prices of energy and the fact that the systems that are put in place, at least at the government level, I'd say feed-in tariffs and feed-in premiums in many cases, do not change really the price of energy. So in one case, the US is going to be fiscal imbalance, which is financing the transition, and in let's say the European case, it's mostly energy bills. And that really creates a difference in situation, not discussing about I'd say the advantage of each of the mechanisms, but just in terms of economic situation and competitiveness, it does create a huge difference. And obviously, it's about the cost of energy in both countries. And it's probably going to remain the case for a long time, I would say, in Europe, probably 10 to 20 years, because the whole production, distribution, transmission system has to evolve from the situation pre-Ukraine war, to make it simple, to the future situation. And maybe another comment, which is the subsidies mechanisms that are in place are in fact well geared towards larger projects, the one bearing more risks, possibly landmark projects, that does work for that, whether obviously European or national, but it's less efficient for what really drives the renewable transition or revolution, which is in fact this flurry of smaller projects that everyone is trying to finance. And in this particular case, subsidies may be less efficient, at least for the moment.
Less efficient
Yeah.
than tax credits?
Because they're not in place, basically.
Okay. Ambroise, I don't know if you have any reaction about this point of view?
No, I mean, what I would say is two things. One, it is great news that the US, at the highest political level, have embarked on the green agenda. It is not that long ago that it was considered a hoax, climate change.
Yeah.
So that is really good news. And then I think what the US is putting in place is excellent, but I think we should not be ashamed of what we have done in Europe, because we have done a lot, even if we are certainly less talented for communication. And we are still continuing to try to adapt to have this kind of level playing field that we would like. And if I make one example, in March of this year, one of the problems that exists in Europe is the length of having authorizations, permitting, etc. What the European Commission, and especially DG Competition, has decided is to alleviate the criteria for these projects in March. I mean, this is a big step because it's not easy for DG Competition to make such a move. And so I hope it will make our investments as attractive. When you look at, for example, the amount of subsidies for electric cars in the US and in Europe, basically they are comparable.
Yeah.
So let's not be too shameful about what we are doing. Thank you.
Maybe we could now turn to the next stage of the energy transition, which has been already touched on by Louis-Roch about the difference between what we are doing now and what we will be doing until 2030 at least, which are now based on very mature and cost-effective technologies such as wind or solar energy production facilities, which can be deployed in relatively big projects, bigger and bigger projects with project finance techniques and players like you, and provided that the regulatory framework is correctly designed. And we can think that these technologies are well suited to reach the first milestone of the net zero path which is 2030, with very mature technologies. But, and Louis-Roch mentioned it, it's also widely recognized now that energy transition, especially for the next step after 2030, will imply the use of breakthrough technologies which are still at very early stage of development and validation. We mentioned energy storage, H2 usage, CO2 capture, transportation and storage, green hydrogen, sustainable aviation fuels. All these technologies and prospects are still in the early stage of their developments, and investment projects linked with these new technologies may be smaller sized, more risky, and often not eligible for traditional project finance techniques. So I would like to ask Louis-Roch maybe to elaborate a little bit on this theme. Does it mean that these projects could be better financed by private equity or venture capital players rather than infrastructure funds? Do you think that green debt securities should be more encouraged and developed more than today? And is there a specific role for public policies in this field of the next stage of the energy transition? Louis-Roch.
Well, I think we faced over the very recent years a situation which was a bit unexpected, which is the fact that private capital was available for some very risky projects. And that's normally not exactly where they fit, or maybe we can discuss a bit about that. And that was really on the back of the fact that many of the investors and investment funds had a lot of dry powder, and so could try and grab a number of deals with some inherent risk. The question really is whether it's completely their place. What I'm seeing now, and probably everyone sees that also, is that the riskier assets or the riskier projects definitely struggle to finance unless they're really helped by the public sector and notably subsidies. And that seems to me quite normal because, in fact, we were really expanding beyond what's typically and traditionally infra into more technology risk, venture capital, or close to private equity, but definitely a bit far away from what's traditionally infra funds. It's now changing. It's now changing because dry powder is reducing, because also everyone's looking at the asset class and thinking, okay, where will be the valuations going forward, especially in light of the increase of the interest rates. And that seems to me quite normal. It's a clear message of reduction of, let's say, appetite for a certain type of risk. And again, demand risk and technology risk is not traditionally exactly what the infra funds or the traditional infra funds should be doing, unless they're being de-risked up to a certain extent by public support. And I think we're basically where we should be just right now.
Thank you. So you tell us that, in fact, of course, there will be projects with more technological risk and even demand risk in the infra environment, infra fund environment, but that's maybe the reason why we should redesign maybe the public schemes put in place with some de-risking schemes, for example. Is it what you have in mind?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. So, message received. I would like now maybe to devote maybe the last part of this discussion to the question of investment in grids, which is a very important also topic of the energy transition. because we know that this transition means not only new clean energy production facilities, but also upgrading transportation and distribution networks for gas and electricity, especially electricity. Electricity grids are the backbone of the energy transition, yet the networks we have today are not ready for the future. For example, according to the IEA, electricity T&D grids need to expand by around 2 million kilometers each year to 2030 to meet the needs of the NZE net zero scenario. This absolutely stunning number will require very huge investments in network infrastructure, which are anticipated by the experts, but not necessarily accounted for by governments and also market players. So I would like to ask Darko to, first of all, to know if he shares this diagnosis, and how do you see the role of private capital in this huge investment effort, which seems to be needed in the coming years? And do you think that this grid investment could be a kind of energy transition bottleneck if not implemented, for example?
Merci, Jean. First of all, I'm very excited to be part of this panel, and I think that this matter at stake is obviously of importance for all of us globally. Listen, I think that this is probably one of the topics in the energy transitions for which we can with certainty say yes. And I think that investments in the grid, whether for the transmission or distribution, will be obviously necessary. I think that the energy transition sector, if I can call it like this, faces a number of challenges. The first one is that we have a huge diversification in the production means, diversification of alternative fuels, diversification of strategies with a lot of competitiveness among governments themselves, especially in Europe, and diversification of actors, where we see the importance of private equity and capital coming from investment funds. I think that the certainties that we now have is that we need to achieve the energy transition. That's goal number one. We definitely need to rely on all production means and rely on all alternative fuels, and we need to implement them in parallel. We know that this will require a huge amount of money, and that this is not something that the states will be able to finance on their own. And we know that the grid connections, distribution and transportation will be a key element for the future. First of all, because we've seen the electrification of a number of our transportation means being more and more important. The electricity demand is very high, and if you look at, for example, the electricity that will be needed for the electrical vehicles sector is obviously huge. Then we know that the renewable connections and their volatile generation profiles are by nature something that has to be coped by the various networks. And we already know that certain networks, such as Spain and Texas, have suffered from the solar generation last year. So batteries will definitely have a role to play in this, because I think that they will address the short-term demand and probably lower the pricing for high demand and by way of capturing the electricity that's produced by renewable means. And I think that although the grids are now state-driven, the interest for this class of assets, for debt investors, for equity investors is huge, and they will be the one who will probably finance this in the future.
Thank you. Very good message for Ambroise.
I agree. Well, actually, we finance, I mean, this is part of what we finance for our climate investments. Clearly for us, grids, but also everything related to interconnectors is absolutely essential. We have also, we can link that to innovation in the battery system. For example, discussions we have with Cyprus currently are very interesting in that regard. I mean, there are plenty of things that, but if we want to be successful on our climate objectives, we need to do a better job on the grids.
Thank you very much. Maybe for the last set of questions, I will ask each of you to give us what is your, from your point of view, the top priority for the next stage of the energy transition, meaning after 2030. What would be the top priority that we should prepare today for the second stage of the energy transition? I don't know who, maybe Louis-Roch, you begin.
Yeah, quick comment. I'd say top priority would be to make sense of it all. Make sense of it all.
Okay.
Why am I saying that? Because in fact, I mean, we're talking production of energy, electricity, local, regional, national, depending obviously on what you're using as a source of power. Then we're talking biogas, biomethane. Then we're talking carbon capture, we're talking H2, and we're saying whether H2 is, let's say, green or not green, and exactly to what extent. And we're talking also storage of energy, short-term storage. I think we have this more or less clear with batteries, but long-term, medium-term or long-term storage isn't. And it's very difficult to really project oneself into some of these future technologies, not knowing exactly where they fit into the whole panorama and where they fit exactly into the production beyond 2030. And this makes it difficult. We know that some projects absolutely make sense, but when you were discussing grid, for example, what type of grid do we need to really enhance? Where? This is really a complex topic, and I'm not sure everyone has really clear views on that for the moment.
Thank you. Who wants to follow?
It's a very difficult question, actually, to answer, because I think that nobody knows where we'll be in 20 years from now. I don't think that rebuilding pyramids will help us, obviously. But what I would say is that we probably need to address this clearly as a global challenge. And so we need certainty and collegiality as to the strategy that we will adapt for the future. So all what we currently see, including competitiveness among countries, especially when it comes to electricity production, is not necessarily giving optimism for the future. So I would say strategy, global strategy.
Thank you.
And Ambroise, a final word?
I would say two things. One is not answering your question, and the other is, I hope, will. We are in the critical decade. And the critical decade ends when your question starts.
Yeah.
I think the most important if we want to be successful for 2030 and beyond is to make sure that we are in 2030 where we are supposed to be.
Okay.
If we are not, it's going to be very difficult to reach the net zero target that we have. The second thing that is valid today, that will be valid after 2030, if we want to be successful, we need that the energy transition is perceived by everybody as a just transition.
Okay.
If we give the feeling that basically it's only for rich people, it's always the same who pay, etc., be it inside or outside Europe, we are going to fail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to our participants.
Thanks a lot to the moderator of the session. Thank you for this plenary. As we're getting ready for the next part of the program, I want to remind you of the new feature and the new tool that we have at the Infra week and for the inaugural day specifically. You have all started your networking already downstairs and in the corridors between the sessions. I'll invite you to use the newly launched platform as well called Infranet.link. Now, this is a completely new feature and a new tool that was launched by the Paris Europlace team to help you network. Now, we're going to take this moment for everybody to take their seats and also for us to get ready for the next session. There will be opportunity for the Q&A with the audience, so you also have take notes and see whether you want to ask our next speakers your questions and your comments. If you want to do that on social media, please do so. The hashtag is always the same. This is Paris Infra Week, and we're looking forward to getting your comments that we're going to be able to bring on and to discuss on stage here during the inaugural day, but also during the whole week and all the events. And I think we're getting ready to go here. For the next part of this program, I'm going to ask everybody in the room, please take your seats. We're ready to continue our program, and I'm inviting two speakers here on stage. Thierry Do, founder and CEO of Meridiam, and Simon Cooper, CEO Corporate, Commercial and Institutional Banking, and CEO Europe and America's Standard Chartered Bank.